leave a like and subscribe.
Bridge 127, Bridego Bridge, 50 miles from London. The scene of a crime that has passed into legend. The Great Train Robbery of August the 8th, 1963 was the heist of the 20th century. A gang of professional thieves made history when they held up the Post Office Glasgow to London mail train and seized a record-breaking haul of £2.6 million in cash.
Somebody or some group of people from inside the organisation that's being attacked.
The last people to see these files were the investigators of nearly 50 years ago. But Andrew Cook has secured special permission to use the documents to try and solve a mystery that has defied explanation. Who was the insider that betrayed the trust of the service? And what vital information did he leak to the gang? The world was in the grip of the Cold War. There was enormous tension between the Soviets and the West. Espionage and betrayal were feared at every turn.
In 1963, you have the defection of Kim Philby to the Soviet Union. You have the Profumo scandal. You have a string of events, and the Great Train Robbery probably is one of those key events which slowly but surely cracks away at that conception.
The travelling post offices that crossed the country by rail were a familiar part of British life. Nobody ever dreamt of robbing the train.
One of them things that they never thought that would happen. That was a prize. That was a pot of gold. Didn't expect, like, repercussions. We knocked them off the headlines.
One newsman followed the whole story from start to finish.
We're racing through the Buckinghamshire countryside from Aylesbury to Bridego Bridge here, where the mail train was robbed.
The robbery was brilliantly planned and very skillfully executed, and so simple. In the dead of night, one of them climbs the gantry, wires up a cheap battery to the red signal. Train comes to a halt. They burst into the cab. They took the high-value coach and the train on another half mile to here, Bridego Bridge, where they had a lorry and a couple of Land Rovers here just under the bridge. The bags were thrown out of the coach, down the embankment, into the lorry, and in the space of 15 minutes, they'd plundered the high-value package coach, and they were away. If they hadn't hit the driver, it probably would have been quite a different story.
The first two coaches of the night mail train from Glasgow were stopped on this bridge, and £2.5 million were unloaded, brought down that embankment and loaded onto a lorry.
No one previously had even fathomed that a train going at over 70 miles an hour could actually be stopped and robbed in such a technical way. It never even entered people's minds that was possible. Because of this belief that it was almost impossible to pull off, the banks had not insured the money.
As the investigation into the crime was launched, the secret post office inquiry began in the shadows, hidden behind the glare of the media spotlight on the police manhunt for the robbers. For the newsmen, there was a very public face leading the investigation. Tommy Butler, the Grey Fox, a cop who always got his man. Butler had his orders: to arrest the robbers as quickly as possible. The hunt for an insider was not his priority.
Tommy Butler was a very quiet man. He was a totally dedicated detective, and I guess that's probably because his home life was, I think, just living with his mum. He didn't have a family as such, and he dedicated his whole time to dealing with major criminals, gathering intelligence.
Tommy Butler, the head of the flying squad, rejected the idea of insiders. Other detectives rejected that theory on the basis that you can't pull a caper like this, as they said, without inside information. I mean, if you have somebody on the platform in Glasgow counting mailbags, you don't know what's in them.
Could trust no one outside their team.
These trains have made thousands and thousands of journeys without the slightest mishap, without the slightest loss of money over the last 120 years. This is the first time it's happened.
Are you blaming British Railways?
No, I'm not saying that at the moment.
Are you now more convinced than you were yesterday that this may be an inside job?
Well, when I was asked the question yesterday, I said I did not rule out the possibility of it being an inside job.
The post office probably regarded the robbery as a greater insult to the post office than the railway people regarded it having their train stopped here and robbed.
Following in the footsteps of the post office investigators, author Andrew Cook has discovered that the first clue they had to go on was a phone call from a mystery figure telling the gang exactly what time to hit the train. With the help of their network of underworld informants, the police had already put together a list of suspects for members of the robbery team.
This is post 120-100.
But crucially for the post office investigators, the list also included 2 suspects who had not been part of the robbery gang.
Now, this is a newly released file, offenders and suspects.
When we actually got the information that the bottom line was £1 million and the ceiling was 6 million, this to me was what I'd always been looking for, El Dorado. This was the crime to end all crimes. It was Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel as far as I was concerned.
There was no shortage of crooks in London's underworld ready to follow his dream. Career criminal Gordon Goody and armed robber Buster Edwards had worked alongside Reynolds before.
We have, if you like, a unique pooling of a charismatic leader like Bruce Reynolds, the military precision of Gordon Goody, the hard-edged character of Buster Edwards, you know, determined, if you like, to rob a train of millions of pounds. But, you know, we need a means to an end, and the means to achieving that is the inside information. Without the inside information, those unique abilities count for very little.
The contact that would lead the gang to the vital information they needed came not from the underworld, but from the establishment itself. Brian Field, a solicitor's clerk, was hooked on the adrenaline rush of crime. Investigators would later discover that he had worked with members of the gang before, setting up thefts from the homes of his wealthy clients. When it came to robbing a train, Field had exactly the right contact for Reynolds and his gang. And that man was an Irishman. In the best tradition of a 60s espionage thriller, Field's contact, the post office insider, insisted on meeting in a remote corner of a London park.
The individual who supplied this information has been dubbed the Ulsterman, who's become almost this mythical figure.
Well, he wasn't a railway porter. Let me put it that way.
Working as the muscle for the gang, Wisby had no need to meet the Ulsterman.
He had to be someone in the Royal Mail. He had to be someone who knew. It was Gordon who met him, and then he introduced Buster to him, and they're the only 2 people that met him.
And you never met him?
No, I didn't want to meet him, no.
Having tipped off Goody about the train, the Ulsterman continued to feed the gang with vital information right up until the day of the heist.
They had a phone call from Glasgow on the day before the train robbery, and that was the night they were going to do it. And the phone message was, not tonight, there's only about 40 bags on the train.
We was told that if we put it off to the bank holiday, it could be between 2 and 10 million. So we put it off.
There were 12 carriages on the train, but the Ulsterman had told them that the high-value packages were in the second carriage behind the engine.
Some of their colleagues uncoupled the coach, and while the other sorters were happily sorting the mail in 4 or 5 other coaches behind, They took the high-value coach and the train on another half mile. The robbers knew when they got to this bridge that they had a lot of money on their hands, and they did it very efficiently.
The secret files opened by Andrew also revealed that not only had an insider tipped off the gang, but more worryingly, it appeared he had been working with somebody actually on the line.
It was also said that one of the post office men was on the train on the night of the robbery, and that he passed information to his brother, an Irishman. It was alleged that the information referred to the number of bags available to be stolen, and to the number of men to be found in the van which was to be attacked.
The ongoing investigation revealed that a further 16 of the 75 workers on the train were Irishmen. In fact, everybody on the train was employed directly by the Royal Mail, apart from the fireman and his driver, who would be violently attacked by the gang.
The only one who put up a fight was the train driver, Jack Mill. Because it was his cab, his engine, you know what I mean? Which I can understand, I suppose.
At the time of the investigation, there was a growing fear that the post office wasn't dealing with just one or two names, but actually a conspiracy to rob driven by some of the workers on the train.
We've got a list here of 30 names, and an incredible amount of work and investigation went into every aspect of these 30 individuals' lives to try and ferret out who the informants were. Mr. R.N. Billington, Inspector of Wireless Telegraphy, came to see me in order to appraise me of some happenings which had occurred on the 8th of August 1963.
Through his research at the British Postal Museum and Archives, Andrew Cook has discovered a memo detailing a witness report that helped narrow the investigation down to one key individual.
In the files we find a memo which tells us that within hours the robbery taking place at just after 3 o'clock in the morning on the 8th of August, 30 tied pillowcases which appear to be full of money are delivered at a London address. One of the most fascinating parts of this memo is that we're told, or we're given descriptions of individuals that have come and gone from this address.
In particular, the informant had noticed that a mysterious couple had been visiting the house, described as a blonde and a balding man.
It could well be that one of these individuals described is actually the key post office suspect.
The post office investigators put the house under observation, hoping to identify the man and the woman at his side. At 4:30 on the morning of the robbery, the police investigation had begun on the ground. As dawn broke, the train was extensively photographed before being moved to a station to be fingerprinted. The sabotage signals, the cut phone lines, and abandoned pickaxe handles used to smash into the carriage were caught on film, but no prints were found. It seemed there was very little for the police to go on, and the gang was in with a chance of getting clean away. In fact, the gang had travelled through the night to Leatherslade Farm, their hideout 30 miles from the bridge.
We kept off the roads, went through the fields and that, you know, cornfields and whatever. We was on the radio, obviously, and the song come on with Tony Bennett singing The Good Life.
If a policeman had followed up a little more energetically this tip about Leatherslade Farm, they might have caught the robbers there at the farm. But with all the heat on, and the robbers listening to the radio and so on, and seeing the TV, panic stations. They gathered their stuff, they left a couple of men behind with strict instructions, clean every fingerprint out of the place. And they skedaddled.
There was no panic as such. Obviously the press say was panic and all that. I got to say that, haven't I?
The gang worked fast to clear the farm of any incriminating fingerprints. Brian Field, the same man who had introduced them to the Ulsterman and helped make the idea of the robbery a reality, had also arranged for somebody to shield the farm from police scrutiny.
The plan was the guy, we called him the cleaner, was going to stay at the farm and just, you know, answer all questions if anyone come out. It was a legitimate business, you know. The farm had been bought, and so there was no hustle there.
Just 6 days after the robbery, the police discovered the farm and announced the breakthrough as one big clue for the investigation. Brian Field and his man had betrayed the gang by not fulfilling their side of the bargain. The farm had not been cleaned up, and was just as the robbers had left it.
Today, the 11th day in the hunt for the male bandits, out here in the Buckinghamshire countryside, it's been a case of destination robbers' roost. All day, scores of cars, motorcycles, bicycles have been arriving at the gates of Leatherslade Farm, where the male bandits hid with their loot for a few days after the train ambush.
I mean, if the guy had been there, you wouldn't have had people doing 30 years.
So, do you still feel anger about that?
Well, I did at the time, but the point is, it's a long time since, isn't it? You know, at the time, you know, I don't know what we'd have done to him, you know.
What do you think would have happened if Leatherslade Farm had been, as they put it, cleaned up? Do you think you'd have actually caught anybody?
The job would have been very, very much more difficult, of course, because, as you know, by the trial, we depended to a very, very great extent on what clues were left at the farm. The mistake they made, of course, was not getting away straight away, and by staying at the farm, leaving the clues they did, which led to the eventual arrests.
The police are hoping to learn a great deal today about this old farmhouse. Detective Superintendent Gerald MacArthur of Scotland Yard said they'd found a cellar which had produced something interesting, but they weren't saying what. And he said that just about anything and everything they find in the farmhouse could prove helpful.
And of course, the police now had fingerprints all over the place on kitchen implements, sauce bottles, and on the famous Monopoly board. And the fingerprint boys then came up with matches, and the police then were really able to go after and nail the man and charge him.
It was the fantastic work of the fingerprint officers who found all of the marks down at Leatherslade Farm. And if it hadn't been for the work that those people had done, and they were working round the clock doing it, and in those days there was no automatic fingerprint recognition, it was all done by hand. I mean, one of the leading guy there, I think that it brought on a heart attack, the efforts that he put in. But that's what gave the breakthrough, that's what actually gave the names.
The robbers were now on the run with £2.6 million in their pockets. But thanks to the fingerprint evidence and a network of underworld informers, the police could now release a list of names that identified all but 3 of the gang.
They just, you know, got them at random, took them in, questioned them, but they didn't have a clue until they found the farm.
Butler's manhunt was in full swing, and the post office investigation was of little importance to him. What had begun as part of the main investigation was now at risk of being forgotten. News of the robbery gradually slipped from the front page, but one man, the man the gang knew as the Ulsterman, remained free, watching the police investigation from afar. The post office investigators had so far established that the insider had to have knowledge of the payload on the train, intelligence on the best day to rob it, and the means to communicate with the gang on when to attack.
While the investigators, the post office investigators, were ferreting through this list of 30-plus names, there also came forward an informant, an insider from another major London criminal gang.
The informant described a man who he claimed had prior experience in planning mail train crime, and who appeared to perfectly fit the profile built up by the investigators.
He was involved in a group of individuals who were pulled together to take part in a raid, a train robbery effectively, but on the King's Cross line earlier in 1963. What's really fascinating in this report is a section where the informant talks about an individual who visits King's Cross, who the informant describes as an organiser, as a man responsible for establishing train times and station organisation. This individual was a key member and a key player in this project.
The King's Cross robbery was never carried out, but the informant had raised a suspicion. Was the organiser of the King's Cross job the same man who later tipped off the gang about the Glasgow to London mail train and helped them plan the great train robbery? Could this mystery figure be the Ulsterman? Investigative author Andrew Cook has spent months on the trail of the Post Office inquiry into the insiders they had come to suspect were behind the great train robbery. After close surveillance of more than 30 suspects, the Post Office investigation had yielded no leads. Now an informant's report had shifted their focus to one mysterious individual, a man the informant claimed to have seen planning an aborted mail train robbery months earlier.
As a result of this key inside information that's presented, their list of 30 has now affected them. You know, they can't find the missing piece of evidence to convict him.
You chased these men and you started picking them up. At any time, then or since, have they squealed on each other?
Not a bit. There's been a remarkable sense of loyalty. Villains though they are, they're very loyal villains.
You know, the good old British public in the 60s then, you know, over a pint would discuss it, and people were saying, some people would say, good on you. You know, I hope they get away with it.
Which side are you on, the cops or the robber?
The robber, because I think they were clever.
But he's dishonest.
Well, I'm still on his side.
What about you? Whose side are you on?
Police.
Why?
Well, a man did wrong and he should get his own punishment.
When in so many regards one thinks jolly good luck. One again is speaking loosely, and let's hope the police are not watching.
The establishment was pressing for the maximum penalties.
Although the robbers later on tried to minimise the violence that had been meted out to him, it should also be remembered that he was coshed over the head 4 times with a very heavy piece of metal indeed.
Well, I sank to my knees. I don't remember anything after the first blow. I sank to my knees, and the next thing I remember, I was on my knees on the floor. And the plate had filled with bandits then. I could see all these legs all around me. I was then ordered into the passage into the engine room to join my mate and told to loot that road into the dark.
They said that he got injured badly, which he did get injured, but not badly. So that emphasised, at the end of the day, with the politicians giving us the sentence.
On April the 15th, 1964, the gang was sentenced by Justice Edmund Davies.
The judge, Justice Edmund Davies, used extremely colourful, almost medieval language when he was sentencing the robbers. The outrage he personally felt at this crime was certainly reflected in the sentences, which were regarded by many people as extremely harsh.
The intensive police investigation meant game over for the gang. But the search for the possible post office insider, the contact the gang called the Ulsterman, continued.
The reason that the investigation team under Tommy Butler didn't go for the Ulsterman is they may not have fully believed it. That's the first thing. And secondly, if they didn't have any evidence, they didn't want part of their investigation to have been seen to have failed.
The police really don't seem to be that concerned as to how this crime happened, why it happened, preventing it from happening again.
Butler was on a winning streak, and the harsh sentences meant that those few robbers still at large had every reason to keep on running. But the gang leaders Buster Edwards and Bruce Reynolds were finally hunted down before the decade was out.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.